if I'm not passionate about it, I'm not going to give my all. I'm not going to give my best.
Our featured speaker today is an industrial and product designer and the principal product design engineer of the personal care advanced development team at Shark Ninja. Ben, it's a great pleasure to have you as our featured guest today. Thank you so much for being willing to share your journey with us.
Absolutely, not a problem. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, so I would love to lead off before you met Spencer. Can you tell us maybe about some of your, earlier experiences growing up, some of the early life events or mentors that you feel really influenced your development, personal and professional? Was there anything in particular that you think really helped you decide, what big choices to make early on that kind of led to your career path?
That's a really great question. I think if I go back to probably when I think back to the original spark of why I wanted to get into design as a whole, it was probably sort of around age 13, 14, whilst at school, doing I think we're doing a graphic design module in design technology, and I just it was kind of the first time where I'd been given like a brief and then the freedom to go and create something. Um, and I just started, I think it was something really boring, like a leaflet holder for a car brand or something like that. But like, I absolutely loved designing something, creating it, being able to have something physical to show at the end of that. And I think that's kind of when the bug really hit. At that point, I had no idea that product design was a was a thing that I could actually get into, but it kind of stemmed from there. And I sort of went through the rest of my school, kind of being really focused on the kind of hands-on, practical subjects like design tech. Um, and I've always enjoyed getting hands-on and kind of creating stuff and creating physical things as well as obviously digital. Um, and then I guess I went through school. I wasn't a very academic person. I kind of did all right, but I wasn't massively academic. And so I was quite happy to kind of get out of that world, because it wasn't really it didn't really feel set up for my type of learning. I learned by kind of doing and kind of getting hands on with things. So I then started to kind of look around what I wanted to do with my life and kind of came across 3D product design, and managed to kind of enroll myself with a very, very poor portfolio into a product design class in the north of England. Um, and I guess I floated through the first couple of years of that, and it all really came together in the final year, um, where kind of things got serious. You're getting towards the end of your degree, and you kind of need to make sure you're making the most out of it. And I kind of started to think about what I really wanted to do with the skills that I've been learning throughout university, and the big thing that I kind of clung on to, I guess, was being able to create products or create things which were universally accessible and that did good and kind of solved a real problem. I came across a lot of products during my education in early years where they were just products for the sake of a product, whether it was to make money, whether it was just to put stuff out there from a branding perspective, but they weren't really solving any challenges. And I guess I kind of took it on as my mantra even back then, that I wanted to create products which made a difference to people and enhanced their lives, and and kind of made products accessible to as a wider audience as physically possible. I guess in terms of role models, I guess I come from a fairly creative background. There's a lot of languages in my family. My mum, my sister in particular, but my uncle was an illustrator, and so I kind of used to bond quite well with him in the early years and kind of see what he was doing from more of a graphic illustration side. But I kind of we've always had a very similar mindset, and I suppose he helped sort of frame up, what it was to be a designer and a creator at quite an early age before I kind of went into higher education.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's so interesting to see those early experiences or those early opportunities that we get and how they channel our perspective on things as we go forward and how we sort of become passionate about them. I also think that's one of the reasons why people from a young age should be exposed to a range of different opportunities so they can learn what actually does, get them going, get them excited.
Exactly.
I love the mission statement in your LinkedIn profile, within which you say, to create a world that is made good by good design. How did you become passionate about that? And can you tell me what that actually means to you?
So that kind of mantra, I suppose, really has, I guess, formulated within me in the last few years more than anything. So I obviously I came out of university. I fell into the first job I could find. I then moved on to something I was more interested in, and I kind of stayed within that world for a good sort of 8.5 years. And when I came out of that, I kind of felt that I'd pigeonholed myself a little bit, and that I had kind of been doing it for maybe the wrong reasons, and I'd lost sight of that, creating products, creating good products for a good reason. So it was kind of early on when I started a joint venture, creating a design agency called NPD, based just where I am in West London, where I really started to think about what I wanted to be as a designer and what I wanted that agency to be as well. So they kind of went hand in hand. The agency was basically a front for myself and my business partner, so it needed to reflect our kind of core belief. And I think that was again what we were keen to do, was to create or to work with clients that wanted to make a difference and wanted to solve a problem and just didn't know how to get there. And I think that's the sweet spot that we sort of fell into quite nicely, that we could work with people who had really great ideas about solving a really difficult, challenging problem, but just had nowhere to go to start. So we took on quite a few clients of that sort of ilk, which was really great in the early days. And we also, at that point, on the flip side, we turned away a lot of people who came to us with, I want you to make a version of this thing that already exists, and I want to stick my name, branding, whatever it might be on it, and I want to make some money. We would always challenge people who came to us with their brief, and I think that's something that was potentially lacking from quite a few design agencies that I'd kind of come across the years. They were quite happy to take people's money and kind of go and create something, but hadn't really at the very beginning challenged the business or even the individual into why they were doing it. So yeah, it kind of came back round to, if I'm going to work for myself, or myself and my business partner, we're going to be self-employed, technically running a business, I want to get out of bed in the morning and be passionate about what I'm going to be working on during that day. If I'm not passionate about it, I'm not going to give my all, I'm not going to give my best, and therefore the client's not going to be happy, or not going to be the happiest with the end result. So that kind of was a real sort of, I guess, a key point for us. And yeah, like I said, that's sort of stuck with me. And I guess it took maybe 10 years of industry to kind of figure that out. But yeah, I'm a firm believer that I'm in this to make good products that solve good problems.
I think that's commendable that you have that two-part, kind of calibration in your mind, that it needs to serve a purpose, and that there needs to be a reason why it exists. I think that that does make better products get out into the world. I definitely agree with you on that, but I could definitely see where people might resist that, because it's hard for us sometimes to imagine a solution that we haven't seen in action. So I'm wondering, kind of on the flip side of your story, how did it work out when people said, well, I don't really know why, but I just think I want to make this product? Because I can definitely see, that happens all the time in product competition here.
Well, it would kind of go one or two ways. Either they would be like, okay, I'm not going to work with you. I'm going to go work with somebody else. And we'd be like, fine, that's up to them to kind of have that conversation with you. Or they would be susceptible to kind of going, oh, right, I hadn't thought about that really. And the key thing that we always used to go back to people with is like, if you're coming to us and asking us to just create something that already exists, just in a slightly different form factor, you're basically creating a commodity product. And as soon as you're in a commodity product market, you're basically competing to in a race to the bottom in terms of price, because that's what the consumers will be looking for. If they can get exactly the same product or service from somewhere else, they're going to go to the cheapest. And why wouldn't you? So it's in your interest, if you're going to invest in creating a product, creating a business, creating a brand, that you're differentiating yourself enough so that there isn't a direct competitor that your potential clients can go to. Because that way you can then control the pricing. People will pay what they're willing to pay unless there's something else they can get for cheaper that's identical. So a lot of people hadn't really considered that at the early stages when we talked to them. So the good clients would take that on board and kind of go, do you know what? That's great. Why don't we take a step back and look at this category or this business, or the problem that you're trying to solve, and kind of go back a step and go, why are we trying to solve that, and how can we do things slightly differently?
I think that's great, and I think it's also important how they when they did, how they positively reacted to that, and it took that on. I think with that feedback alone, just being like, you need to have more of a reason here, you can already make it so much more powerful. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Can you talk a little bit about your past experience as a board advisor, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, to Destetchi? What drew you to them, and what the experience taught you?
Yeah, no problem. So Desteki was a startup by a young, sort of mid-20s industrial designer called Ben Indinieri. And he, the way I kind of came across him was that he actually approached us as a small product design agency and basically kind of said, hey, I've got this idea for a piece of software which can really be useful for industrial design and product design agencies. And he kind of approaches in the first instance basically to try and sell us, or kind of get us enrolled as early sign-ups to his platform. And at the time, Ben was doing this in his spare time, and kind of working up towards seed funding to kind of get it off the ground. And it kind of, we stayed in touch over a period of about 18 months, where he would periodically sort of update us on what he'd done with ideas to the platform and this, that, and the other. And then it got to a point where I was kind of like, well, I feel like we've got a good rapport going here. We talk fairly regularly, and he had got to a point in kind of the startup phase where he wasn't entirely sure sort of what was needed to happen next to kind of move to the next level. And so he was actually actively starting to look for investors and kind of advisors to the business. He felt like he'd kind of taken it as far as he probably could on his own. And so, yeah, the conversation happened quite naturally, where I was kind of just like, look, well, why don't we set up something a little bit more formal? And I can sort of help on a variety of different angles. So going back a step, the idea behind the platform was basically to utilize AI to help create kind of online research tools for product designers. So one thing that's critical when you're designing a new product is understanding the landscape, understanding the competitor products, understanding the technology that's been and gone before, and building that picture can often be quite time consuming. And in an agency business model, time is money. So to enable designers to get back to primarily designing rather than trawling the internet or store visits, whatever it might be, to understand the current competitive market for the product that you're designing for. The Techie was going to be a platform where you could use AI to essentially trawl the internet on your behalf to pull customer reviews, to pull sales figures, to pull feedback and comments from social media platforms on different types of products, and compile all of that data into a very usable and workable kind of data pack or research document that the designers could then reference from when coming up with new ideas. One of the key things that drew me to it was the fact that you could say pick a particular industry, for example, reusable water bottles, and you could trawl the AI bot would basically trawl the internet and pull up all of the real negative reviews that people had with existing water bottles, and they equally positive reviews, what they liked. And from that, as a designer, you can really build a picture of, right, if everyone's got this same sort of problem, maybe we should start to design a solution for it. So as an idea of a tech platform, it was really quite interesting to me. And I think being of the target market for selling the platform to, I was able to sort of work with Ben and the team to provide that internal insights. What would I like to see as an agency owner to this platform to do, to be the pricing model, how flexible do I want it to be? And then apart from that, I've also got a heck of a lot of connections within the design industry. So it was also about getting it in front of people, and the right people who could also feed back into it or potentially be early customers to the platform.
I appreciate how you articulated the idea, and I can definitely see where it has merit. So I know you recently shared that he's decided not to go further with it for one reason or another, which unfortunately happens with a lot of startups. I guess in your view, though, what do you think the biggest barrier to adoption would have been? And it's okay if it is the barrier that actually made him pivot, or something else that you kind of saw along the way that you solved.
So I think the biggest barrier to adoption of something like that was proof, was evidence that it would work, and evidence that it would provide the consumer with what they needed from the platform. And on the flip side of that, it was very difficult to create that platform without significant investment. So in the end, it just turned out that the investment wasn't as forthcoming as potentially it could have been, which kind of meant that it was a catch-22. We weren't able to build working proof of concepts of the software, which meant you couldn't put it in front of potential buyers and go, here you go, here's a demo, go and use it for a week, and you'll see how much time you can save by using it and how useful it is. So it was a kind of a double-edged sword there, if you like.
I think proof for a young company is so hard at times to acquire, especially when, as you've described, you have those catch-22 scenarios. It can be very difficult to say, like, I need you guys to give me the opportunity to prove it to you. And then they're like, well, why don't you go to someone else? But they also want you to, prove out on someone else. So I think that's such a important point. And it's also, I think there's lots of other issues that can concern people with the AI market at times. Now, you mentioned your work with NPD work with NPD earlier a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about the journey that you went through at NPD, and then how you'd compare that experience to sort of working at a big company like Shark Ninja?
Absolutely. So after, if I go back to the previous role, I was at a company called Tech 21 for over 8 years. And when I started with them, they were very much a kind of a startup scale business with around 12 employees. When I left there, I was the design director of a team of 15 or so people across both UK, China, worked extensively with partners in America, and we'd kind of built this business into sort of a multi-million, pound revenue business with 130 employees across the world by the time I left. So I'd been on a real kind of roller coaster journey with that business, but it got to a point where I felt like I'd given everything I could to that business and to that role. So I took a step back from that sort of late 2019, and the intention was to have a nice sort of sabbatical for a few months and sort of figure out what I wanted to do next. And 3 days into that sabbatical, a guy I went to university with called me up and basically said, "Look, I've seen you've left that role. I've been following you, career progression through the years. We had a very similar sort of ethos and sort of experience throughout that time as well." And he had started NPD as a design agency out of Manchester in 2014, and he'd kind of felt a bit constrained geographically. So 95% of the clients they had were within a 50 to 60 mile radius of Manchester, and his plan was to open up a southern office around London. And if you draw the same geographical ring around London, there's a lot more potential business opportunities. So he originally was planning on doing it himself and stretching himself between Manchester and London. But then when he saw that I was a free agent, as it were, he contacted us, and we started having conversations about what we could do. And so I went into the business with Nathan, and it was, I think, a month before the first COVID lockdown. So we kind of really hit the ground running at the wrong time. We were able to sort of get through that first sort of year or two, and it was a profitable business. We were doing okay, but always with the hope that it would seriously pick up once the economy rebounded a little bit, and we just didn't see that for one reason or another. We were just at a point coming up towards the 3-year mark where I was still working remotely from home. We didn't have a physical office space in London. We didn't have any designated employees of the London branch, and we were just sort of, in my words, we were treading water. We were kind of winning a few kind of smaller scale projects here and there, but nothing that was kind of moving the world, changing direction of the business to really kind of kick it on. So we kind of came to a decision that it was time to sort of maybe draw a line under it and to look at alternatives. And then that's when I started looking around and found this role within Shark Ninja, which is obviously a very different business. But I think the things that appealed to me about Shark Ninja were, obviously it's a massive business with sort of around 3,000 people globally. A significant amount of that are engineering based, which kind of appealed to me a lot, that it was a very product focused business, rather than sort of specifically marketing led. So it was interesting to kind of come in and have a chat with the team and see what they were doing. And I was really interested in getting back into a bigger business again. And I think working in-house as well, having worked both agency side and in-house, agency is fantastic, but you can kind of be working on 4 or 5 different industries within one day. And no matter how good you are at switching between the two, like it's very difficult sometimes to really immerse yourself in what you're doing. You're kind of jumping around quite a lot. Whereas in an in-house role, you become a subject matter expert in what you're doing. And you know the competitive landscape, you know what's going on. you're kind of got a core team around you that are working towards the same goal, and that's quite stable. That I think does appeal to me as a designer, having that stability around and being able to sort of, I call it collision culture, where, and this kind of comes back to, how Spencer and I met. We were basically in the cafeteria at Shark Ninja, having some lunch one day when we sort of started striking up conversations about what we've done in the past. But having those conversations in and around your daily work environment can really lead to interesting opportunities, or it can lead to interesting input into a project you're working on, and vice versa for the other person that you're working with. And I think you just don't get that when you're working fully remote, or if you're working as part of a very, very small team. Whereas, I'm in contact with dozens of people on a daily basis, and the opportunity for that collision culture was much higher when you're as part of a bigger business like Shark Ninja.
I think those are really great observations too. And definitely remote working has, changed our ability to, I like calling it collision culture. When people say networking, it can mean like a lot of different things. But you're right, working in, a big office building with people in a variety of roles, you really do run into people that have done all sorts of things. And that can kind of, evoke your curiosity and help you create, totally in a new vein, I would assume, in your role. I was wondering, I can definitely see the pros of working for like a larger company. But on the flip side, do you feel that creativity is stifled in a larger organization, generally speaking, rather than it is in an agency? Have, not necessarily saying anything negative about Shark Ninja, but just in general, have you encountered that, or, any other real downside to being totally immersed in just one industry?
I think the challenges that you find within a much bigger businesses are the sign-offs you need to go through to get stuff done. As even as agile as a business as Shark Ninja is, like, there's processes in place to kind of get approval for certain things, or to get buy-in from senior leadership, or whatever it might be, and sometimes it can be you've got them on the wrong day, or you've you've kind of caught the timing just wrong, and something you've worked on doesn't land right, or hasn't been communicated properly because you haven't communicated it. And that's just a factor of the business. When you're working with thousands of people globally, it all has to funnel up through a management system, and I think that's just going to happen anywhere. But on the flip side of that, I think having those boundaries and having those stage gates, I suppose, makes you question what you're doing more. And I think that's maybe one of the things that it took a little bit of time to adjust to in the beginning, but I think I actually enjoy now, is preparing a presentation for execs or whatever it might be, to kind of show what you've been working on, and to be challenged on what you're working on, because you need that challenge within product design. You need somebody to question, why have you done that, or what's the reasoning here, or what's the bottleneck? Because in design, without that challenge, and it can quite often become, right, I've designed this thing that I think is great, but actually, does it meet the needs of both the business, the consumer, everything else that comes with launching a product? So I think there's pros and cons to everything. Yes, you're less agile, I guess, within a large business, but having those milestones and stage gates within a process does result in having something a little bit more well-rounded by the time you're getting to put it in front of a consumer.
That's exceptionally interesting, and I think I'm going to try and approach thinking about discussions with like larger teams the same way as what you've described, where like the end result isn't a stifling effect, but so much as a improvement and a better evaluation process. I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you, Ben. Now, one of the things that happens in life and in entrepreneurship especially is that you have to make large pivots. I know you've talked a little bit about NPD. Are there any other examples in your life when you've had to make a large pivot or deviation from your plan? And how do you handle that, and how did you manage that? Would you make any changes to how you managed it last time?
That's a really good question, Spencer. I guess my major pivots have all been work related. I think if I go way back, one of my early pivots was my first job in London as a designer was working with a luxury fashion jewelry brand. It wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't an industry I was interested in, but it was a way and a means into the industry to get that experience that a young designer needs. I I did that for about 18 months, and then I left to move over to Tech 21 because I was going into there as a junior designer. I was going to be underneath a more experienced CAD operator. I'd be able to learn the tips and tricks of the trade that I wanted to, because I was kind of got to the point where I was self-teaching myself, and I could see myself kind of building very bad habits, or not knowing what the right option forward might be, but just sort of winging it almost. So I decided to make that change over to Tech 21. It happened that throughout that notice period I had, the designer I was going to be working underneath actually left. So on my first day at Tech 21, I turned up and I was the de facto designer, 3D designer for the entire company, and that really kind of in the first couple of weeks was a real tough thing for me to kind of get my head around. I'd really set my hopes on coming over and being able to shadow and learn from somebody more experienced than I, and to be kind of thrown in the deep end there a little bit was quite daunting. But in the end, I think that as a life skill probably set me up quite well. So I obviously, as with anybody, you have you self-doubt yourself and go, I'm not good enough for this, I can't do this, whatever. But I really kind of made an effort, stuck at it, kind of ground it out. And that role really, and within that business, was really a great position for me to be in, to sort of kickstart my career and the progression as well. So I went from being that, like I mentioned, there was 12 people when I first started, and I went from being the sole product designer who could do 3D modeling within the team to a design manager within a couple of years. So I was managing 3 or 4 designers underneath me, to then moving up to a head of design role where I had a team of 8 or 9, and then up to that design director role where I was managing everything from design, packaging, graphics, and engineering in China as well. So I think having the kind of belief in yourself that, what, I can figure this out as I go along. I might not know everything now, and I think that's a good thing to kind of have in any role. Nobody knows everything, and so appreciate that you need to give yourself time to sort of figure things out as you're working through them. And if you're in the right business, in the right space, then you'll get the support to do that. But I guess that was a fairly challenging pivot, or one of my fairly challenging pivots, but it worked out around the end.
I'm really glad it did. That is a lot of pressure. I can only imagine how you felt kind of walking into that, thinking that you'd have an opportunity to get mentored and have a learning opportunity, and you were kind of self-coaching along the way. I really appreciate the thought that you put behind product market fit. And I know, that some of that is probably in your job description at this point, but how did that evolve for you? How do you think you became, I guess I want to say, better at this role, at looking at multiple angles, being able to like zoom in and zoom out, as we often say in entrepreneurship, because it seems like you really seem to have honed that ability for yourself.
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate again through my career so far to have been exposed to those other elements of the business. And I think, being at Tech 21 and very much a startup phase, you're all in the same room with product design, graphic design, marketing, operations, finance. We were bumping into each other daily, and you kind of just by osmosis, you sort of pick up those challenges that those other teams within the business are going through, whether it's logistics or finance or some marketing challenges. And then obviously, as I kind of went through the kind of career progression at Tech 21, I was then sitting on the global leadership team where I was, shoulder to shoulder with the head of operations, director of operations, sorry, the director of marketing, finance, all that kind of stuff, and you're talking through those challenges on a regular basis as a leadership team. So you build an appreciation for the other elements of the business, not just the design or the product side of things. So I think that's definitely been a real sort of enabling thing for me to kind of to try and put myself in somebody else's shoes, whether that's internally or as externally as a consumer, to try and go, right, I'm designing this for this particular problem, and to have that empathy with that potential user or with that, whether it's part of the internal business as well. I think that insight has been very, very, useful for me as a designer and as a person as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I think that set of skills, like being able to zoom in and out and put yourself in other people's shoes, is such a powerful skill set, but also difficult to self-evaluate. Like, if you're good at it, it's hard to tell, from yourself. So I think it's cool to hear how you've gone through learning that and where it's benefited you as well. Now, this is more of a life balance sort of question, but generally, how do you go about balancing your work, family life, and everything else that you're passionate about? Especially since in Shark Ninja, we sometimes work with people in China and the US.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think again, this probably stems back to 2020, where just before the world went a bit mad. But I got to the point at Tech 21 where I was directing and managing a team across the UK and China. So obviously I had that time zone to deal with. But then I was more and more or increasingly pulled into sales conversations, and 75% of the business's market was North America. So I was dealing with the full spectrum of time zones across the world. And at that point, I think for whatever reason, I kind of got sucked into it. It became the norm. But I was online and available from 6 o'clock in the morning when I woke up through till 10, 11 p.m. every night when I went to bed. And on reflection, that was really quite damaging to both my mental state, my health, as well as my relationships. When you're permanently switched on or permanently waiting for that email or message or whatever it might be, you're not present in your personal life. You're kind of you're there in body more than anything. So it was one of my promises to myself when I kind of left that I would not let myself get back into that situation, and that work is work, and we work basically to live. We shouldn't live to work. There's a very clear sort of boundary for me now between the two. And it's difficult to balance that because you want to do a good job. You want to give everything to your employer. You're passionate about working on these projects, and you appreciate the fact that they've trusted you enough to bring you in a role and to pay you a salary, and you want to make sure you're giving back to the business through output. But there's no point going too far and then basically kind of not not having that time to switch off, forget about work, focus on other things, and then come back into work refreshed. So now I've kind of got a very clear mentality that when I'm at work, I'm 100% at work. I'm there, I'm present, I'm doing the best I can. But when I'm not, I'm done. I can switch off unless there's some incredible emergency that requires a little bit of out of hours input. Which, when you actually start to think about things, what kind of emergency would require that sort of input that couldn't wait potentially 8-10 hours until you were back online again. So yeah, it's kind of a personal thing, but yeah, I've got quite good at switching off. I think key to that is obviously either having a designated work devices that you can shut down, leave in another room, or being very, very controlled with yourself, turning off notifications for anything work related and kind of going, I'm just not even going to look at that. I'm going to, tonight or this weekend, that's my personal time. And I've found that I've been more energetic whilst at work. But I've also found that because you're having more experiences and you're more present with those experiences outside of work in your personal life, you often kind of come back into the work environment more refreshed and potentially with new and interesting ideas from stuff that you've seen. Like if you've got time to go abroad, or you do a city break, or just hanging out with friends who are in different industries, making the time to do all of that can often result in bringing back into the business something quite interesting that could become something profitable in the future.
I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. And I think this is something that, not just individual people and employees are struggling with, but employers as well. And I was kind of thinking when you were talking about what you were saying about, that collision culture too. And if you're burnt out, you're not going to really want to go nurture other relationships. Make new friends like as likely. So I was wondering, how do you think like workplaces that have a lot of remote employees, some of them have to, or have teams of employees that are, working across continents or the globe could do a better job kind of nurturing that collision culture, like, some of the meetings that have been so meaningful for you?
I think, honestly, nothing can really beat face to face with colleagues, or even just people in general. I think remote working and the tools that we have to do that are fantastic to enable us to kind of quickly move through our working lives and kind of get stuff done. But for me, I'm quite keen to build relationships with the people that I work with, to understand how they tick, to understand, how best I can interact with them, to one, get the most out of both of us, and two, to ensure that they're able to kind of give as much as they can as well. So I know that travel's been a little bit more constrained over the last few years, but I think any opportunities to put remote teams together, and potentially it doesn't even have to be, um, let's have a team away day or away weekend or whatever it might be, and it's non-work related. I think just having the ability to put people in the same room who are working on a common problem as part of a wider team, I think you'll start to see those relationships where you're getting more out of the team, because you'll find that people will dig a bit deeper for somebody that they like rather than this robot that lives across the other side of the country that you only ever see through a square box. If you've got a more personal relationship with somebody, they are probably more likely to kind of help you out when things go wrong, or when you're in dire need of some assistance or help. And I think we're all humans at the end of the day. We do need some level of human interaction. So I think it's it's difficult to find that balance, and I understand that working remotely is it's a benefit in a lot of senses. We do a 2 days at home, 3 days in the office at the moment, and I really appreciate those days at home because you can kind of get other stuff done around the fringes of what you're doing at work. But you can also be more productive because you're maybe not sat on a train for an hour every day, just kind of wasting away the time. So it's difficult, but I think any opportunity where you can get people in the same room, and like I say, it doesn't have to be purely social, it doesn't have to be purely work related, preferably some blend of both, but allowing people to build those relationships in person will kind of help. And I think I realized that the most when I started working with manufacturers out in Asia. So we would, basically communicate over email because, the language barrier between China and the UK, our Chinese was terrible, their English wasn't that great. And so you would just kind of go through email. But when you're asking them to kind of, help you out, solve a problem, rather than kind of getting pushback, when I was able to get face to face with these people and build rapport and build relationships, go for dinner with them, maybe the odd karaoke bar or two, all of a sudden I noticed these doors opening where people were like, "Oh yeah, of course, Ben's asked for something. Let's do what we can to see how we can help him." And I think that is, it's quite important.
Absolutely. And I think as much as you say, the remote working experience feels more efficient, you're, in your own space, and you can be, harder, get more work done sometimes in certain areas. But I do think that face-to-face is in some ways irreplaceable. And I think you're right that it'll have to be finding the balance between the two that's really the key in a lot of scenarios. Now, Sebastian, I think you had a question you wanted to ask?
Great, thank you. And thank you for the talk. So basically my question would be, how do you use product design to create a connection between like the business or the values of the business or the enterprise and the consumer, right? Because sometimes the product can be very sterile and doesn't communicate anything. So how do you make it more personal or to reflect a vision, something like that?
That's a really good question, Sebastian. I think, and this is more challenging as you get into those products which are more, which are being chosen more on a personal feeling basis rather than a functional basis. So, at the moment we're working on a lot of beauty concepts, and the key difference is it can't just be purely functional. There has to be some level of personal connection with the consumer there, so they can feel passionate about using the product that you created. So it's difficult, but yeah, finding that balance between meeting the needs of the consumer from a functional perspective and meeting their personal needs. Do they like the way this looks? Do they like the way it feels in the hand? Do they get joy out of using it? And I think the only way of truly nailing that is to bring your target market or your target consumers into the design process as early as possible, and have them as almost subject matter experts along the way. So you're kind of design iterating prototypes, whatever it might be, and at every as many stages as possible, you're putting it in front of the target market and going, how do you feel about this? Give us your feedback, go and use it for a day, like let us film you using it, like what do you like, what don't you like, and all of that will be completely subjective to that user or that consumer. But it should, if you can get a broad enough sort of cross section of the target consumers, you should be able to kind of get a good steer on kind of designing your product to suit those people, and meet their needs, as well as obviously not just purely functional.
Once you go ahead on these steps of iterating and putting the product you designed in front of the users, and you know how they like it and how it can improve, like whatever, because like their processes, for example, in the ed tech industry, so that's how I started. So once I do know that it helps students in what they're studying, like what would be the next step into making it into like a sellable product, because like it started as a research or just activity to design it to improve the experience, and now this is like the transition I'm at, basically. So like making it into like a product that sells and not just that is good in the A/B testing I've done.
I think the key thing is, it sounds like you've got to the point where you've got a proof of concept where it solves the problem you want it to solve. I think the key thing is communicating the user benefit to the user. Whether that's you'll save X number of hours per month by using this. I think on the flip side, as somebody who would buy potential software for businesses and stuff, like you'd always be looking for, right, how can I might have to spend X amount per month on a subscription for this software, but I will save X amount more than if my team were doing this manually, or if we just continued to use the existing softwares that we have at the moment. So I think the key thing there is to build case studies that show categorically that your software or your product delivers on what you set out to deliver with it, and you're basically you're making the lives easier. Therefore, the money is almost sort of irrelevant, as long as it's essentially you need to be at a point where they're not spending as much money either in headcount, time, whatever it might be, as opposed to using your software to sort of make their lives easier.
I see. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben. Now we are at the 5-minute mark, but we do have one more question from Claudia before the question we normally end with. Do you still have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah, of course, go for it.
Excellent. Now, Claudia asked, what do you think about the current boom in AI? And I'd just like to add to it, particularly in relation to tools that you or I might be using.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously a lot of fear, I guess, at the moment, because AI is one of the most evolving industries, fast-paced industries at the moment. And the way that I look at AI is that we should be embracing AI as a tool, like you say, Spencer, not to replace the work of designers or engineers or whatever it might be, but to enhance their daily lives. One example obviously is Des Techie, in terms of using AI to trawl the internet, so you're saving time not having to manually do that. I think that's a very clever use of AI. If we look at other things like Midjourney, which can obviously create amazing imagery just from a few words or a sentence, I see that, and I think a lot of people are quite scared, because they're kind of like, that's going to, replace art. It's going to replace product design. It's going to replace whatever it might be. But I see it as an opportunity to use software like that in the quick creation of visual stimulus for a product development stage. So, for example, if we were having a hack on a specific problem, it could take a few hours to go away and CAD up an idea, or to draw up a lovely visual or a sketch or whatever it might be of your idea, so that you can communicate it to the other people in your team or the stakeholders. Whereas if you could literally learn how to craft a really well-worded sentence that basically goes, right, draw me this with this with this in this situation, you could create within a matter of seconds. You can create a visual that's quite stimulating, that you can pin up on a board and basically kind of go, look, this isn't it, but this is the direction I think we should explore as part of this idea, and then get immediate sort of input on it from. So I see tools like Midjourney as being very interesting to support design development at that sort of stage. I don't think it's ever going to take away from the fact you still need a person who understands feasibility, wall sections, thicknesses, electronics, all that kind of stuff that comes together in a product. You're still going to always need that, and I don't think AI will replace that just yet. Anyway, I think that the other challenge that we have with stuff like Midjourney is confidentiality. It's all very public at the moment, but if there was to be a software which was more private, where you could create that that imagery in a private, confidential scenario, I think that'd be really interesting for designers as a whole.
Sorry, to say something about that, you can download the Midjourney model and you can have it run on a local environment. That's what we do in like my project, and on that way we can generate images privately.
That's amazing. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, thanks for adding that in, Sebastian. And Claudia, I just want to make sure too, did that kind of address what you were thinking about the current boom in AI, or did you have another angle to that question?
No, that's more or less where I was at, because one of the things that I've seen recently is that also a lot of people are like, with the letter that came out with people asking for a delay in advances, like people who are already in tech. It's always interesting to see what that idea is for AI. I also agree with what you said, like it's going to be something to add on into our toolbox, and it's not something that will replace all things. And every day new things are coming out, so it's quite interesting to see how it has taken off in the last couple of months.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It really is. It's quite fascinating. I think we're gonna have to have another follow-up talk about that at some point too. And thanks for answering so many different questions, Ben. I really appreciate your perspectives. I do want to just wrap up with a question that we'd like to ask at the end of these discussions. What do you think has been, one of the best takeaways from your journey so far? And what words of wisdom, if you will, would you like to leave us with today?
So I think the biggest piece of advice that I could offer to any young product or industrial designer, or somebody who designs things that get physically made, is to go and visit either the place where the thing will be manufactured, or somewhere similar where you're seeing how products are actually made. That was the biggest sort of step change in my career, was when I was given the opportunity to travel out to China and spend a lot of time with a lot of manufacturers, predominantly in the soft goods and injection molding area, but also with some electronics. And when you understand sort of what's downstream of design within that whole launching a product sort of cycle, when you understand what's downstream, you can tailor your initial design approach to make that a more streamlined process. One of the challenges that I've seen early on was, designers designing things which are not physically producible. Whether it's the material's too thick, or it's just not possible to design it, and so there's a whole delay in the process where you're fixing that problem in between design and manufacturing. Whereas if you can at least design a product from a conceptual stage to 80-90% feasibility, there might be some bits in there you're not sure on, but you've got a kind of good idea that it can be manufactured, then it makes the process a lot more streamlined and quicker moving forward.
Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. I think that's very much appreciated, and something I also saw when I spent a bit of time in China. Just like getting that further understanding of the separation between the theoretical, the data, the CAD design, whatever it is, and the actual reality, it is very, very important.
Sorry, just in addition to that, I think for any young designers or anybody who's not experienced that, you can find a local manufacturer of anything. It could be sheet metal, it could be plastics, it could be electronics, and just kind of knock on their door and say, "Can I just have a quick tour and a look around? I'm interested." I think more often than not, people would be quite happy to support that.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a good point. Thank you so much for coming on today, Ben. We really appreciate your thoughts and everything you've shared and taught us today. Have a great day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are ahead of you.
Yeah, and
Thank you very
Spencer,
much.
thank you so much for introducing us to Ben, too.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks very much.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.